It was quick. And to be quite honest with you, it happened organically, right? We didn't come in with the idea that we're going to go from a $6 million portfolio to a $60 million portfolio in a 3-year time span. So it happened fast, but without the team that we've built here with Aligned, we would have struggled. So I wish I could say it was something sexy, but it wasn't, man.
Nobody's born incredible. People who do incredible things simply took the right steps. This is our journey. This is the hunt for incredible. All right. On today's episode, we have a very special guest, and I mean that with sincerity, especially on this one. We've got my man, Bryan Tubaugh. So Bryan owns the property management company that we use for our deal and solving. They're doing a great job. It's Aligned Hotel Management, and they've done really incredible work, not just with our property, but in the history of the business. And I'm really excited to share Bryan's story. So Bryan has taken his business from $6 to $60 million in 3 years. And what's interesting when I was talking to him about it, opening this up and talking about the stats, is he started off when I asked him, what are the incredible stats that you want to go through? He opened up with, well, we're still making it incredible. We're on our way. And then he just drops these bombs, like going from 6 to 60 million in 3 years. So I'm really excited to hear his perspective and how he approaches things as an ever learner. We're going to dive into stories like how he was sued on day one to kick things off and how he worked through that. So without further ado, Bryan, thanks for being on the show.
Gideon, hey man, thanks for having me. It's been an absolute pleasure getting to know you through this whole process and experience. Yeah, it's been a crazy ride. So I'm looking forward to sharing some stories here.
Hell yeah, let's do it. So yeah, why don't you kick things off with a high level overview of what that $6 to $60 million looked like, and then from there we'll dive in.
Well, a lot of gray hairs. Yeah, it was quick. And to be quite honest with you, it happened organically, right? We didn't come in with the idea that we're going to go from a $6 million portfolio to a $60 million portfolio in a 3-year time span. I mean, literally, our goal was, we weren't even looking at revenue at that point. We were looking at how many properties can we get that, one, we're passionate about managing, and then 2, making sure that we could scale appropriately, right? So to be quite frank with you, I didn't think we'd be at a $60 million portfolio until we were 5, maybe 8 years into conception. So it happened fast. And I think, I tell everybody, it sounds really good, looks really good on paper, but without the team that we've built here with Aligned, who you've had an opportunity to meet most of the team and, the key role players, we would have struggled. It's definitely not Bryan at all. It's the entire Aligned team. And man, they've just, when I tell you they work bootstraps, it's a lot of work. So I wish I could say it was something sexy, but it wasn't, man. It was just hard work, dedication, being available. I think that's the biggest key that I have found, which just blows my mind. I come from a sales background. Not being available to your clients and always there. And you'd be surprised how many people are like, I can't get a hold of anybody from my management company or whatever it may be. So yeah, I wish I could say it was a sexy story to this growth, but it's been grit, man. It's been a lot of grit from the team.
Yeah. And that's a great point to touch on, is just like sales is a contact sport and the follow-up is everything. I read a stat the other day. It was a breakdown of what percentage of sales come from like the first, second, all the way through the 10th point of contact. And virtually like 0 sales happen on the first point of contact. I think the second point of contact was like 3% of sales or something. And then it goes up exponentially over the points of contact, where it's like something like 80% of sales happen after like the 6th or 7th point of contact. And it's literally that repeated engagement that you get that traction and deliver on what you're looking for.
Well, and I think the big thing I've learned, and again, every day is a learning experience. Today, I just learned something about managing cost per occupied room just a little bit differently, right? Every day we learn something and we pivot or we add it to our arsenal, et cetera. I think the biggest thing I learned, and really it's a good story with our growth, I worked on our largest account for literally 5 years before, and then it was a random phone call, and actually leads into the story of us getting sued. When we finally, the case got dropped, we ended up settling for very, very little, but we just wanted it off our plate. That day we did that, and call it what you want. I'm a very religious person. God wink. The day we settled, man, I got a phone call from the client that I've been working for 5 years, and literally all he said is, "Are you ready?" And yes, sir. What are we ready for? Right? Like, oh, we'll figure it out. Yes, sir. We're ready. Dropped 5 hotels on our plate, and he said, "You got to be able to take it on one day next month." We had 3 people in our corporate office. 3 people. So
nice. And that was a testament to like the execution that you had done up to that point, huh?
Yeah, I mean, again, so I guess we can go back into the story of the conception of Align. So Helinda, who is my mom and my business partner, which makes it amazing because I get to work with her every single day. I mean, I know it sounds, some people would be like, oh, I got to work with my mom. It's not the case at all. Honestly, I think it's brought us closer and allows me to spend that quality time with her every single day, both doing something we're passionate and love. So it's an amazing experience, just that alone, right? I mean, you could stop there, and Aligned is everything I ever wanted, just having that. Try not to get emotional. Anyways, yeah. So we started. We were with a different management company, and we were operators. I was the executive vice president. She was the president, but we didn't own the company. Great group of guys, great group of people. They just had different vision. We wanted to grow. I really wanted to expand. I was getting out there. I was also in charge of business development. So I was getting out there and I was meeting a lot of people, investors, people like yourself that were getting into it, asking questions, doing a lot of mentorship, consulting, whatever it may be. And when I would bring it back to the team, there was a lot of no's. No, we don't want to go to California. No, we don't want to go to Colorado. No, we don't want to go to Washington. And I was thinking to myself, like, well, I want to challenge myself, right? I'm young, I'm hungry, I want to go. So we started talking, and you know how it is. Like, you get out with your buddies. We were just talking before this, right, about golfing, and we should just record something on the golf course. I was actually out with a gentleman that I met, and we were golfing. And this first golf partnership started probably about a year and a half before Aligned was even thought of. And, you know, when you're out with your buddies and you're talking about stresses of work and whatnot, and, you know, and he's an investor, multifamily investor. And, you know, I would say about a year in, he says to me finally, he's like, why don't you do it yourself? Right? Like, what? And Gideon, I never knew what my mindset was called. It was an entrepreneur mindset, but I never knew that. Right? Like, I hated working for the man. I hated having to go in the office. I hated having to clock in. I hated having to, you know, count all my calls and tell you exactly who I'm talking to. And it didn't feel like freedom to me, right? Like, I liked the paycheck. I liked, you know, traveling, which our industry allows a lot of. But there was that part of me that just, why do I have to tell you if I talk to somebody, if you know I'm going to hit my numbers, or if I'm going to, you know what I mean? So I've always had that kind of mindset, but I didn't know what it was, right? Because I had always worked an 8 to 5, 9 to 5, came up through housekeeping, you know, everything was just very structured for me all the time. And the every 2 weeks golden handcuffs. So anywho, so the gentleman said to me, and I, you know, at first I'm like, dude, there's no way, like, no, thank you. Okay. And he never pushed it on me. And then COVID hit. And again, great group that we were working with or for, but the vision wasn't aligned. So finally, COVID hit, had time at home. You know, you start talking to your wife. And I'm so thankful for my wife, because she really was the one that was, you know, listen to him, do it. Like, you're complaining about these things, put your money where your mouth is. And so I jokingly said to her, Giddy, you'll appreciate this. I jokingly said to her, I said, well, then we're going to have to sell the house to have capital to get this started. I kid you not, the next day she calls a realtor and she's like, all right, you're selling the house. Like, I mean, and I think that's so important to know that for me starting out, if I didn't have that support coming from my wife, like, there's no way in hell this all starts, right? Like, none of it. So anyway, sorry, I'm going back and forth here. So we sell the house.
Really quickly to dive into that. I went through a period in college where I was obsessive about wondering why people weren't just doing the damn thing. And I was blown away by the responses. Like, I had a buddy who he was a former like D1 baseball player in college. And he was building like this entire like baseball camp for this guy that was making stupid money. The margins were crazy on these camps. And I asked him, I was like, you're literally doing all of the work. What's keeping you from building it yourself? And the response is, I asked probably like 100 people this over the course of like this 1 year in college. Nearly every single response was, oh, I guess I hadn't really thought of it. It's like we go through the schooling system, and the schooling system is like, oh, here's a track. You sit on it. You work your way through. You become a good employee. You do your job. You don't collaborate because that's cheating. And you just like, you do your job and you do it well and you do what you're told. And it's crazy how seldom it actually crosses people's minds, or the people whose minds it does cross are like, that sounds scary. And it's usually a self-limiting belief that actually shouldn't be there to begin with. And if they actually challenge that self-limiting belief to see if it was actually holding them back, they'd find that it's nothing. And there's nothing holding them back except the decision to simply go do it.
You're 1,000% correct. And again, to what I was saying earlier, I didn't even know what it was, right? But to your point, you go through this schooling system that is just, hey, get in line, wait for the water fountain. Hey, raise your hand to speak. Everything is structured to keep you in this box, right?
Yes.
And you and I were talking before. I think what finally got me to make the jump, obviously the support from home, all of that. But this gentleman, and I'll say his name, Jarrett Reedhead, I owe him everything. He said something to me one time while we were driving to one of his, or actually we were flying to Ohio. He has got, I think it's like 900 units in Ohio. And I'm seeing how this gentleman lives and seeing all these properties he has. And, you start going, what the hell? Like, smart guy, but I'm like, you know what? I've got some of these traits too. Like, why can't I implement that? And you know what he told me, Gideon? It stuck with me. And maybe he read it from a book. He said, Bryan, every time we talk, you talk about risk. I want you to take the word risk and I want you to put the word fear in there. And he said, and my background, I'm an athlete. I played sports. Like, you attack fear head on, because usually on that other side of the wall, everything you want is over there. And then I know it's so cliche and everybody says this, but man, I could tell you right now, it is the truest thing I think I've encountered since we've started Align. Every big client I'm afraid to go talk to, once I do, holy cow, it's like all of a sudden these doors just open up, right? Or, hey, I don't know if do we put the cart before the horse? Do we have the proper capital to bring on a key player like Deborah Lottie, right? Like, you've met Deborah, you've worked with her. I mean, that's a key role. Do we have enough coming in to cover that role? You know what? Let's do it. We're afraid to do it. Let's do it. It's going to make us better. And I'll tell you what, our operation has, with her coming aboard on the team, right? So I guess my point is that mindset, as I tell everybody, okay, you keep talking about risk. Is it really risky, or are you afraid of what's going to happen? And I know both can blend a little bit there, but 90% of the time, you're just afraid of the unknown. And on the other side, and if you fall on your ass, who cares? Now you know, and you know what to do better the next time. And you have to fail over and over and over again. It's so cliche, but it's the truth.
It is true. And then it's also the like once you've identified that it is fear, actually doing a fear analysis to see if what you're fearful of actually has any validation, right? So like, oh, what are you fearful of if you pursue this business opportunity? Well, I'm scared of failing. Okay, what happens if you fail? Oh, I could be out 20 grand. Oh, what happens if you're out 20 grand? Oh, I'd have to, whatever. And if you get down to the bottom of it, like usually the worst case scenario is like, oh, I'd have to find another job, or I might have to sleep on a friend's couch for a couple months. It's like, is that really that? Like, what about the risk of living your entire life a drone, struggling to make ends meet and never pursuing what you're interested in, and then living a life in regret? Like, that to me, that's a risk that people hardly ever weigh. Is like, oh, what happens if I look back on my life and I say, man, that kind of sucked. That was average. Or like, man, I wish I had done that thing that I wanted to do.
And let me add to that just a little bit. Now, I've got two young children. Right? I've got a 12-year-old and an 8-year-old. And I mean, since my son has been maybe 5-6 years old, I've always told him, hey, you gotta step out there. You gotta take that next thing. I know it's scary, but you gotta do it. I mean, think about walking the first time, right? These kids fall. You're watching a toddler, right? And they get up and they do it again. And I think for me, what really hit me, and again, I go back to my wife, I'm just so thankful. The perspective she put at it was, when you're on your deathbed and your children are sitting next to you, do you want them to look at you and say you left something out there? Or do you want to be there and be like, my dad gave it all and went after everything he wanted, right? And like you said, worst case scenario, it crumbles, we sell our house and we're living in a condo again. Well, been there, done that. We survived. We're good. So anyway, so I think to your point, it's the biggest risk is going to your deathbed knowing you had more in the gas tank. Like that's scary to me. Like, we get one shot at this. Let's go.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. So share a bit more for those who are fearful and they think like, oh, well, it could all fall apart or I could get sued. What is your mindset towards those types of adversities? And you can even use the lawsuit on day one as an example. Just
Yeah, so
rip the
I'm going to
Band-Aid
give you
off.
that
Just dive right in.
I think you'll enjoy this story. So every other year, my wife and I go down to Cabo, and I mean, we started this tradition probably about, I would say 8-9 years ago, right? Just we love Cabo. It's beautiful. We did our vows in Cabo. Like we love Cabo. It's our spot. So we used to stay at, like these all inclusive little hole in the wall hotels. Just it was a week of her and I just to get away and dream and have our visions. Right? So that's just been a tradition. So October 27th, 2021, I had given my proper notice to the other company, said this is what we're going to do. They were totally cool about it. And I should have had a red flag. They were almost too cool about it. Like, hey, we support you. We do this, we do that. So pretty much built aligned without my mom knowing that I was going to snag her and bring her to Aligned. So I had done all the background, building out all the systems, all the tech, and there's a lot. So did all this, after 5, 6 p.m. So it's nights without sleeping, getting everything set up. So anywho, sometime in September, my mom, I finally talked her into coming on board. And let me tell you, that was not, you would think it would be easier than it was. Like, at what point do you just say, I'm your son? Like, come help me, right? You've gotten to know Helinda a little bit. She's very loyal. She's a hard worker. She's as advertised, right? So anyways, and we believe, and we bring this to Aligned, like integrity, honesty, and reputation is everything. I've got one name, and I don't ever want that tarnished, right? And my dad has taught me that you protect your name with everything. So we did it the right way. We went and said, hey, we'll give you however many months you want, make it reasonable. We'll help out, whatever. So they told us they needed until the end of the year. So October 27th, we have since upgraded a little bit. We a nice resort there. And this is during COVID. So we leave on a Saturday. So you had to go in and take your COVID test like that Wednesday, I think it is, or how many ever days they were doing before it. So we're on, and we have the same caddy every day that we play golf, right? And this is our third round by this point. So, and I'm a decent golfer, but not a great golfer. So hole 7, never forget it, par 3. I hit a shot, Gideon, and this doesn't happen often, but like 2 feet from the hole, right? Oh, nice. And the caddy, my wife, me, we're like, yeah, and we got some Modelo's in the hand, and all of a sudden, this entourage of golf carts come up, and it's staff, and we're like, what the hell? And my caddy looked at me like, what'd you do last night? I don't remember. And they pull up, and they tell us, hey, you've got COVID. I had tested positive for COVID. I felt great, nothing bad or anything. So, and listen, this gets better. We're like, okay. And they're like, well, you got to leave the resort. So they literally just kicked us out, right? They just kicked us out, had to go find a little hotel again in downtown Cabo. Like we're searching day of. Not to mention we had guests with us and they kicked them out and they all tested negative. So disaster. Dang. So I'm in the cart on our way back. And I get a call from my mom, and she is in tears, hysterically crying, Gideon. And let me tell you, I've been raised by her. I've maybe seen that woman cry 2 or 3 other times, and one of them were the death of her parents, right? And so now I'm like, okay, well, and this is all happening while they're taking me to get kicked out of the shuttle. So they had said that we were served. Obviously, I hadn't gotten the paperwork because I was in Mexico, and they made this big production. It was actually pretty bad how they treated her. So anyway, so she calls me crying up, letting us know that we were getting sued. And I'll be honest with you, I told her, I was like, hey, I can't deal with this right now. I'm getting kicked out of the country. So I need to figure this out first. And then let's get there, right? So fast forward, we got back, got healthy. And I'll be honest with you, I went right back into that scared mindset. And the first call I made when I got back was to my new business partner, my capital partner. And I said, hey, I know we had come up with a number and this is what this number is going to, and we agreed this number was going to be what it is. But man, these guys aren't fooling around. I got served a deck this big. And let me tell you, those attorneys, if anybody's ever dealt with them, they'll have you questioning yourself. Like the way they word stuff and the stories and like using words that I didn't even know. I guess maybe I am. No, I'm just kidding. So anyways, I went right back into that scared mindset. Like I turned right back into that. No, screw this. Like, no, this is crazy. Like this is going to bury me, my family. And then what? I mean, we were in Tucson, which is a smaller town. What happens to my reputation? Will I even be able to get a job? So it went that way. So I called my partner and I said, listen, I'm fine. I will go to the grave paying you back for the capital we've already used, whatever it needs to be, because I'm not that kind of guy. I said, but I get it if we want to fold this up. And to his credit, he said, Bryan, it's not about the business. I invested in you. I invested in you as a person. He goes, I don't know shit about hotels. I invested in you. And I know what you can do. And because of that, whatever this costs, we're going to fight it. We are going to fight it, right? And Gideon, I went from scared to, I don't know if it was the athlete mindset or what it was. I instantly went into gratitude to these guys trying to sue me because they just fueled a fire that it still hasn't been put out. 3 years later, there is still this fire of saying, oh, hell no, these guys went after my livelihood. They went after my life, my name to try. And what we found out what it was competition by litigation, right? Like eventually they were trying to drain us out financially, not knowing the backing we had. And they were trying to get rid of us so they didn't have to compete with us.
Yeah.
So I am happy to say right now we've got the 27 hotels. They've got 3. So
hey, there you go.
Yeah. But, again, I used to be bitter about it. But now I am so thankful that happened because it changed my mindset. I was fighting, and I had never fought for something like this ever. I had never been this vested into something, and that just magnified it, right? So it could have been something that just was detrimental, scared us, and it almost did. But it fueled the fire, man. It just changed the mindset.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, I can relate to that. There's so much power behind that perspective of looking at adversity as the opportunity. Like the setback is, I literally tweeted this yesterday. The setback is the opportunity to shape you into the person you need to be. Or even there's a great book by Ryan Holiday called The Obstacle is the Way, which is effectively like when you see adversity, understand how that adversity is actually a catapult. Something similar happened to me where, so a few years ago, my wife got really sick and her health was spiraling. We took her to 7 different doctors. Nobody knew what was going on. They did 1 million tests on her. And it was really, really challenging to the point where we had to accept like, it's only getting worse at an exponential rate. She was bedridden, couldn't walk, brain fog was so bad. Nobody knew what was going on. By far the hardest time in my life. Within that same 6-month period, my mom got a form of cancer that only has a 20% survival rate. My dad's heart was failing, so he was in the hospital looking for a heart transplant on his deathbed, basically. And he would go in and out of like, oh, he's too sick, he won't even survive the transplant.
Oh my God.
To, oh, he's a little bit better, but now like only the sickest person gets the transplant. So it was just like he was in there for 4 to 5 months. So to spare the details, basically it was the most, also while going through a real estate deal that we almost lost with our earnest money and everything. So it was like we were talking about before, all roads converging, but these were like really high stress roads. And I literally remember going on a walk and having a conversation with God and saying like, if you choose to take my wife, like I accept that. And like having to accept all of it. And literally like, this is after holding her and like, we would both just cry, like not like, what do we do? What do we do? There's nothing you can do. And in that season in life, I studied heavily. Like I read the Bible. I read books like Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning, who is a psychiatrist who went to Auschwitz and other concentration camps. And he talks about just like the psychological degradation that happens in those places and what it's like to be broken down. And he makes a very interesting argument. His argument is that struggle and suffering is actually what elevates people. So like it's through that struggle, like the expression pressure either breaks pipes or it makes diamonds. Like he makes the argument that it's like you can't have a diamond without that pressure. And he even goes as extreme to say some people who went through the concentration camps and survived actually became elevated and better versions of themselves than if they hadn't gone through the concentration camp at all. But of course, there were also people who were completely broken through the concentration camps. And so I remember reading that and just like working through and reconciling what I went through during that time. And now looking back on it, like the questions that I was forced to ask myself in those moments were questions I would not have been able to ask myself. It's like you have those experiences that you can't, like I can't just tell someone what it was like and they understand it. It's like you have to live it. And so while I would not wish that on anyone and while I wouldn't sign up again at all, I am very thankful for the growth that happened through that period. And it shaped me into a totally different and better version of myself than had I not gone through that at all.
Well, and so we had something similar, and we've been fired one time, and I will tell you, similar to what you were saying with your dad. So Helinda, my mom, she went through open heart surgery in the beginning of the second year, and we didn't know it was coming. Right, she had a real issue. And what I was going to say is, I think what that does is it also gives you perspective, right? Like that we got let go, and a lot of it was because we were so concentrated on what was happening at home that I have to look in the mirror and say we weren't good operators. We weren't. We let what happened to my mom impact the whole business, which we learned a lot, right? We learned a lot. We learned that it can't, if we want to grow and scale to where we want to be, it can't rely on two people. I have to have a team that is going to be able to pick up the slack, because we're not all going to be our best every single day, and life happens. But what I will tell you as well is the perspective gained from that was, for me, it was like, you know what's really important? First of all, and at the end of the day, is monopoly as important as what is happening in your life, right? And that perspective, sometimes when you're in a big deal, when you're in a negotiation, when you're in a heated moment, it's like, you know what? We're not curing brain cancer. That's what I always tell my team. Guys, we're not curing brain cancer. We're putting heads in beds. Let's break this down. And let's really, if you're losing sleep every day because of it, maybe this isn't for you, and that's okay. Because really, let's be honest, the things that matter the most are your dad, are your wife, being there for them for those moments. And for me, that little perspective change and realizing that this isn't everything also helps you take those steps, because you have those people in your life. That's what's important. I don't know if that makes sense, but it really shifted.
No, that totally makes sense. Yeah, I always say if you zoom out far enough, you can't see Earth. It's like,
and I always say you can't see the picture while you're painting it. So sometimes you have to look back.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, two different ways of thinking of the same thing. Yeah, 100%, man. Not only that, there have been a lot of really interesting studies on how much better your brain operates when you are in a state of calm and gratitude. So, like, understanding, and that's part of the advantage of identifying the opportunities when going through something, right? Like getting sued and saying, like, now I get to understand how, like, lawfare is played. Like, what happens when somebody's sued? How do you navigate this? Like, yeah, it's stressful, but there's an opportunity there where now you've been battle hardened and you understand a really important aspect of business, which has to do with getting sued. And anybody who's scaling a business, it doesn't matter what business you're building, like, you will get sued at some point. Like, you will get attacked. It's like how people love fighting the biggest guy in the room. My cousin was the center for Texas Tech when they were the biggest team of all of them. He's like 6'4" at the time. He was like over 300 pounds, a monster of a human. And he was like, dude, people always want to fight me. He was like, everywhere I go, like, people are looking in the room. I'm like, dude, you are the last person I would want to pick a fight with. But it's like, people love, if they think there's an opportunity to, like, sue the big dogs and walk away with the settlement or whatever it is, they will. So, like, getting that rep in, even if the timing is inconvenient, it's like, if you plan to build anything significant and meaningful, that's a rep you're going to get in at one point anyway. So go into it knowing you're going to get that rep in, and get excited when you do get that rep, even if the timing's inconvenient, because if you have the proper outlook and you see it as an opportunity to learn and to catapult yourself forward, then it's going to make or break you.
Well, and to your point, here's the other thing, right? The attorney that ended up working with us, he's one of the biggest figures in Tucson. He actually heads up the bowl committee for, like, Snoop Dogg's got his bowl in Tucson. And let me tell you, guy calls me all the time. Hey, I might have a client for you, blah, blah, blah. Like, I mean, so many good things came from that. And it's so easy to sit back and be like, those assholes came after me. No, you know what? They gave me an opportunity. And to your point now, because here's the thing, anybody that's going to get into property management or owning properties, get ready. A tenant or a guest, there are ambulance chasers out there that are going to chase you and they are going to try to sue the owner or the property manager. And that is a constant threat. And I don't care if you own a Ritz-Carlton or a Studio Six, you're going to get it. And now, to your point, Gideon, that stuff used to scare me. Now it's, okay, obviously we don't want it. We don't welcome it, but we don't get afraid of it either. And we know how to handle it to usually where it scares them away, because now it's, okay, you're going to threaten me with that now. Well, now that you brought up legal, I can't talk to you anymore. Have your attorney reach out to me. So now, wait, now I have to have an attorney. So now, yep, and that's going to cost you, and et cetera. So, but when you first hear that, like you said, that rep, before you get that rep in, man, that's scary.
Yeah. And it's back to that fear of the unknown, like you mentioned before, where like the only reason it's scary is because it is the unknown. So until you actually know what you're worried about, don't worry about anything. I read an interesting study from Harvard, and Yale later replicated the study with pretty similar results. Is that 85 to 90% of the things you're worried about never actually happen. And
Isn't
then on the
true statement.
Yeah. Yeah. And then on the flip side, 80 to 90% of the things that are great that are going to happen to you, you're not going to see coming at all. So it's like live in this state of like agility where you can properly respond to bad things that do happen, but stressing about things that might happen in the future doesn't make any sense. I mean, you should be mindful of it so that you can prepare yourself properly. Like if you have a property, get insurance because someone might fall, but don't be stressing about people falling. Just put the right things in place, make sure that you're mindful, and then stay agile so that as bad things happen, you can pivot and respond properly.
I agree. And I think business is a lot like life, right? If you're afraid to get on the airplane, how are you ever going to see, the beautiful beaches of the world, or how are you going to see the mountains of the world? I mean, in business, the same thing. If you don't take that flight, like how are you ever going to find out the benefits that it can bring to you, right? Or the freedom that it will give you. So yeah, you can't live in a fear mindset. You really can't. And a lot of people do.
Yeah, I 100% agree. Tell us a bit more. Let's take a couple steps back in terms of what your upbringing was like, because people might be listening and saying, whoa, you built this multi-million-dollar business. You have financial backing. That's crazy. I could never do that because I came from a less fortunate background or whatever it is. Share a bit more about your upbringing, because the meat of what I try to communicate with this podcast is that it's regular people who do incredible things, and that these mindsets and actions can be replicated by anybody if you pay close attention and you're astute and you actually execute on it.
Yeah. And I do want to state this. I don't want to discredit my upbringing, because I had parents that tried to give us everything they could. Right. So I don't want to discredit their parenting, or, we just weren't fortunate. We came from very humble beginnings. Helinda literally was a single mom for a long time as a housekeeper. I mean, line level employee. And let me tell you how honest Helinda is. She one time ran out of toilet paper on her cart, and she thought she did something wrong. She took her last $3 and went and bought a roll of toilet paper from Circle K to replenish her cart. It blows my mind today, that story, right? But she was a single mom, didn't live in the most affluent part of town. I mean, I can vividly remember being somewhat embarrassed. You didn't know if you turned on the lights in a house when you brought the friend over, if the lights would turn on or if cockroaches would spread through the living room. And it wasn't because we weren't clean. It was, as you know, when something gets that bad of an area of a home, it's really hard to clean it out, right? So we came from very, very humble beginnings. I found a love for sports. So fortunately, that got me to a smaller college in New Mexico. I was not a good student. I can't remember who you were talking to on one of your podcasts, but they weren't students either. I did what I needed to do to be on the field. So whether that was I found a friend or I had to study extra hours, I did whatever I had to do to be able to play ball, right? Like that was my motivation in life. So I got a chance to go to school. I dropped out of school. Actually, I got asked to drop out of school. They invited me to take the exit. So I resorted back to what I knew, right? And that was hotels. And I too then began my career in housekeeping as well. That's just what I knew. So yes, we started very humbly, and credit to my parents. They gave everything they could and everything they had to make us not feel that way. But looking back at it now, it was like, Holy shit. So I do this thing, Gideon, speaking on the mindset piece. I call it my gratitude drive. So funny story. I now own a really nice Ford Raptor, and I say this not to brag, but through growing up, I used to go on these walks, and I would then, when I got old enough, I'd go on these drives, and I would always go to these places that I always wanted to, like, wow, this is where I want to be one day, right? And Tucson, Arizona, there's a street called River, and you could talk to Neil and he'll tell you about it. But there's all these beautiful homes on this hill, right, River Road, and all these beautiful car dealerships are around there and everything. And I used to drive when I was 16, and I'd go, man, I'm going to be there. But I'm in my 1987 LeBaron that every time I shift the gear, it was stick, right? And I remember one time I brought a friend with me, and he looked at me, he goes, dude, people like us don't do that. Like, that's not us. And, he lived down the street from me, a really good friend. And he said, that's not us, Bryan. And I just looked at him, and I remember being like, man, maybe he's right. Like, maybe this isn't what we're going to be. So anyway, so we went on, and then back to the Raptor story. When I was 23, and this is kind of embarrassing, but people need to know it, I had to file bankruptcy, man. I filed bankruptcy at 23 years old. How embarrassing is that? Because I got one of those damn Kohl cards, and then a Best Buy card, and then this other card, the typical college trap, right? Credit cards, just maxed them all out. I was like, oh man, I got so much money. And then I was making $38,000 a year, and I thought, man, I'm on fire. Like I can pay all this. So, and I say this, so went through the bankruptcy, right? Right outside of the bankruptcy, actually, I was still in the process of it. I met my wife, and, obviously when you know, so I started taking her on these drives, and we ended up moving in together in this shady neighborhood, man, this 1-bedroom condo. And there was a Ford dealership right behind it. And I remember we would go in and we'd sneak into the service area at night. And there was this Ford Raptor there. And it was this black Raptor. It was so sick. And I remember, you play with it, probably illegal, whatever. And and the doors opened. And me and my wife sat in that truck. And it was only like 5 minutes, right? And I was like, one day I'm going to have one of these. And I'll just never forget. She was like, yeah, you are. You're going to have that. And that was 15 years ago. So when the Raptors first came out, probably right around there, maybe it wasn't a Raptor, it was an F-150. And so anyways, so that moment I knew, I was like, I'm going to have one of these. So it just changed once again. While we had the humble beginnings, I always had the mindset that I'm not going to let that hold me back. And now here we are today. And again, I mean, I still think we're on that journey of getting to that River Road mansion, because we're not there yet.
Yeah.
But again, I think coming from the humble beginnings, you just have to have the mindset, and you just have to be able to be, that no lose mentality.
Yeah. And just to bring this full circle before wrapping up, it's back to the struggle developing you into the person to be, like going and seeing the Ford Raptor and sitting in it and experiencing it and saying, this is what I want, and getting crystal clear on your vision of what you're working towards is massive. There's a great book called Buy Back Your Time, and in it references a study about how 90% of entrepreneurs had some sort of struggle through childhood, whether it's they grew up in a chaotic environment or they were confronted with a lot of major challenges that they had to solve on their own, and how effectively that those experiences and those challenges shaped them into people that can approach challenges with comfort to solve them. And so, like, that's why when I talk to people and they bring up like, oh, well, it's harder for me because I XYZ, I don't come from money, or I'm stuck in I work 12 hours a day just to make ends meet. I don't have time, whatever it is. Those are all opportunities that are shaping you into the version that can actually tackle the big things. And if you had everything handed to you and you were just coasting, you were given everything growing up, you went to the private school, you expected things to just kind of naturally happen for you, you're not hardened into that version, or you're less likely to be. Everybody's different, but you're less likely to be hardened into that version that can handle it. It's like kids that grow up in like super football cultures, like in Texas, football is huge. So kids go to they are so hard into their high school football, whatever. They're going to naturally be better at football than somebody who started playing football in Europe or something, because they're not hardened by that environment.
I agree. And I think the other thing, and I know we're cutting short on time, but, dream, man, dream big, dream so big that that you think it's crazy and other people think you're crazy. I've heard this so many times, but until it started impacting my life, Like, man, be so unreasonable. My team always tells me, you're so unreasonable. Like, you're so unreasonable. I'm like, yeah, I am. But guess what? Every time you guys step up and you do it. Like, we do it.
Yeah.
We do it and we figure out a way to do it. And your mind, it's crazy. The universe, God, like it, if you really believe in something and you vision it, man, it's weird how the universe starts setting things up for you.
Oh my gosh, that we're gonna have to tee that up for a round 2, because that is a conversation that we have got to dive into. That's one of my favorite topics, and I do think that is like foundational for the mindset to actually tackle big things and dream big, and to like what to put out into the universe, and how to align that vision and that mentality and that approach with what you're going for. Bryan, I'm so bummed this conversation has to wrap up. We seriously will have to do a round 2, because I always love chatting with you. Where can people find you?
They can find me at www.alignedhm.com.
Awesome. And I know I have listeners that are in real estate. If you're in hospitality and you're interested in buying properties, or if you already have a property and you're interested in having somebody manage it, definitely reach out to Bryan, because they are fantastic and they've done a great job with our property. So super excited to have this call with you and continue working with you.
Thanks, Gideon. Appreciate it, man.